Hey guys, my name's Pocket and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite solo queue champions, and that is Nami. We're going to cover everything from the absolute basics all the way up to the niche little tips and tricks that are really going to help you master her. Once again, this guide was voted on by you guys in the community tab over on the channel page. So if you want to have a direct say in what champions we produce guides for next, hit that subscribe button, head over to the community tab and see what polls we've got coming up. So to start off, we're going to run through Nami's abilities just so you know exactly what you're capable of when you're playing her. Nami's Q is Aqua Prison. Nami sends a bubble to the target location, and when it lands, it deals magic damage and suspends all enemies that it hits. The suspended enemies are also revealed, and it's important to note that a suspension is not a knock-up, but it will act like a knock-up when interacting with other champions' abilities. So if you have an allied Yasuo, they can ult enemy champions that you suspend with this Q. Nami's W is Ebb and Flow. When cast, Nami will unleash a stream of water on the target champion. This can include allies, enemies, and yourself, and when it hits, it will bounce up to 2 more times, but it must alternate between enemies and allies. Now, depending on whether you hit an enemy or an allied champion, you will have a different effect. Enemies will be damaged, and then it can only bounce to an ally, and allies will be healed, and then it can only bounce to an enemy. Nami's E is Tidecaller's Blessing. Nami blesses the target ally champion or herself for 6 seconds. Once blessed, the target will become empowered for their next 3 basic attacks or abilities. These basic attacks or abilities will deal bonus damage and slow the target for 1 second. And Nami's ult is Tidal Wave. Nami summons a tidal wave which surges forth in a long line in front of her. All enemies hit will be dealt magic damage and will be knocked up for 0.5 seconds. When they return to the ground, they will be slowed between 2 and 4 seconds based on how far the tidal wave traveled before it knocked them up. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about drafting with Nami. So in this section, we're going to talk about where Nami excels and where she does poorly, and look at who she counters and who she is countered by to help you decide whether or not Nami is a good pick in your champion select, so you can truly make the most out of her. So firstly, Nami is an enchanter support. She has a focus on healing and she has pretty great sustain. She also has some pretty oppressive poke, especially early on. Her W is easy to hit, her E just adds a static amount of damage to auto attack trades, and a good Nami that is confident with setting up her Q can play quite aggressively. But the price Nami pays for this is a very small base health. She is incredibly squishy, so if you can lock her down, it's not that difficult to take her straight out of lane. For this reason, Nami suffers the most into hard engaged champions. These are generally hook champions like Blitzcrank or Fresh, because their job is to simply lock down the enemy support or ADC, and they do it just so very well, it's very dangerous to play Nami into them. These are the champions that are going to give you the most hassle. They are the champions that you're going to have to think the most about when you are playing into them, and they are probably the champions that are statistically the highest counters to Nami on whatever stat slice you're looking at. That said, Nami is very versatile. I would actually consider her a relatively safe first pick champion. While she does suffer into things like Blitzcrank and Fresh, it's not that bad to play into them. You can make it work, and we're going to talk about a couple of the items and especially runes that you can take in the coming sections. But where Nami does poorly into hard engaged champions, she does very well into pokey champions. Champions that are unable to lock Nami down will generally find that their poke damage is just healed up really easily. And because of Nami's ability to self-cast that heal and have it then even bounce to the ADC, a Nami that can make really good use of her W will find it quite easy to trade with these poke champions. So she's not just sustaining their damage, but actually trading back and doing really well into them. This is something that you need to be considering if you're going into these poke champions, things such as Xerath or Lux. And once you get the hang of trading as well as sustaining into these champions, they become little of a threat. Nami is also good into hard engaged supports that don't have a very long range. These would be people like Pantheon or Set. You still need to think about your positioning very well, because if they do get onto you, they will kill you very easily due to your low HP, but you can really abuse the range against these champions, and also you can abuse your slow. Champions like Set that just want to run at you really suffer into slows, so make good use of self-cast E and then applying your slow through auto attacks to ensure that your trades are safe and easy. I would say that Nami is in a good position into other enchanters at the moment. I would prefer a Nami over, say, a Soraka or a Yuumi right now, but I think she does suffer into a Sona simply because of Sona's ability to scale into the late game better than, well, pretty much anybody. And finally, the other threat that I would at least be considering is that Nami finds it very hard to counter roaming champions like Bard or Pyke. Because of your squishy nature and your complete lack of mobility, it's very dangerous for you to follow roams or even to get deep wards and stop them roaming into you. Pyke and Bard have relatively unique ability to gank their own lane, as well as just head off all the way up to top lane sometimes and make the most out of you having a slow laning phase. Now, it's not actually that bad on Nami because Nami does have the ability to lock people down, especially post level 6. Your ult is relatively easy to hit, so if you are going into a roaming champion, try and make the most out of your oppressive laning phase and intimidate them by threatening your ult and your Q, but not actually using them. This way you can keep their solo lone ADC back from the minions and create a CS difference in order to really make the most out of the support roaming. If the support's roam does not end up in them getting a kill or getting another lane ahead, this should go very well for you. In solo queue, it would be wise to get used to pinging the support being gone and really try to let them know. Let's face it, it doesn't matter how much vision you give them, people are pretty blind in solo queue on the best of days, so do think about where they're going or where they might be going and try and warn people a little preemptively. Next, we're going to talk about Nami's runes. Right now, I think there is only one keystone that you should be considering on Nami for every single game, and for that we're going to go into the sorcery tree and select Summon Airy. Airy is just a fantastic overall keystone for an enchanter. For Nami specifically, it's adding shielding to your kit, which will proc every time you empower an ally with your W or your E, and it's giving you a relatively significant amount of extra damage as well, especially in lane because Nami has such a good ability to take favorable auto attack trades. This stems from your empowered auto attacks using your E and your excellent sustain. And now, as we move into the sorcery tree on line 1, we'll always look towards Mana Flow Band. I think Mana Flow Band is an absolute necessity on Nami, and you will too, because mana sustain is one of the key problems that you have during laning phase. But luckily, Mana Flow Band is a really good rune. It gains stacks when you hit enemies with abilities, so due to Nami's easy poke with your W, you should have no problem getting this stacked really quickly at the start of the game. Once stacked, it's giving you 250 extra mana and some extra mana regen, which is awesome. And then on line 2, we will almost always look towards Transcendence. Transcendence will give us consistent ability haste spikes at level 5 and 8. And then at level 11, it's going to refund you some of your basic ability cooldown every time you get a kill or an assist. Now this is awesome, it really helps Nami in teamfights because of this bouncy potential from your W and the AoE ability of your Q and your R, as well as the fact that using your E wisely on an ally will mean that they will also be getting you assists. You're just overall capable of picking up takedowns during teamfights pretty easily, which means that during teamfights you will be consistently refunded basic attack cooldown, which is really awesome. If you are in a game where winning laning phase is an absolute necessity, let's say you have a very oppressive early game ADC, like say a Misfortune, and the enemy has an ADC that needs to scale and farm up and isn't very oppressive in lane, like say a Kai'Sa, then you can look towards Absolute Focus to replace Transcendence. Absolute Focus gives you ability power whenever you are above 70% HP. This is really good because unlike Transcendence, it activates immediately, even though the amount of ability power does scale towards the late game. So it makes you much stronger in lane, and because of your great sustain, staying above that 70% maximum health limit is pretty easy. Like I said though, you should usually be looking towards Transcendence. It's only in games where you think, I have to get ahead, I must shut the enemy down because they're going to scale much better than me, that you should be looking towards replacing this with Absolute Focus. And then finally on line 3, I would always suggest going for Scorch. Scorch has a very low cooldown, which makes it really good in laning phase because it's doing damage every time you hit the enemy with an ability. As we've talked about, you have great trade potential and easy poke potential in lane, so Scorch just really helps you out. It does drop off into the late game, but its power in lane really can't be understated on someone like Nami, and I will take this in 90% of games. If, however, you are in kind of the opposite situation as I just explained with Absolute Focus, and you have the scaling ADC, and you're going into a very oppressive bot lane that you're not really going to be able to get ahead of, then you can look towards Gathering Storm. Nami has relatively good AP scalings on all of her abilities, so that extra AP that you're going to build up as the game progresses is really helpful, and it helps all of your abilities just do their job better. Now, for secondary runes on Nami, I will usually look towards the Resolve tree. This is for one pretty simple reason, which I'm sure you've guessed, and of course that's Revitalize. Revitalize just gives you a percentage-based buff to all of your outgoing and incoming heals and shields, which is really awesome for Nami. This buff is increased when the target, be that you or your ally, is under 40% HP, so it can really come in extra handy in clutch situations where you really need it to show up. Due to the just huge amount of healing that is in your kit when you're playing Nami, you're going to notice a relatively significant amount of extra healing, so for the cost of just one sub rune, it's really good choice. The second rune in this secondary tree is going to be a choice between Bone Plating and Font of Life. Bone Plating is my usual go-to, and it's something that I will always take when I'm stepping into a hard engage bot lane. It has a long cooldown, meaning that it's not very good when you're going into poke heavy team comps on the bot lane, but it's really good if you're going into an engagey based team comp like a Fresh or a Leona. It really does reduce their burst damage by a significant amount, especially early on. But like I said, when they're not looking to burst you down, but instead to poke you from afar, because of Bone Plating's long cooldown, it makes it a pretty bad sub rune. So in that case, you're going to want to look towards Font of Life. Font of Life is a very all-round rune. It's not exceptional at any stage of the game, but it's always useful in lane because both your Q, E, and R are slows, stuns, or knockups, and this will help both you and your ADC sustain in lane, especially going into pokey team comps. Then, as we move into the late game, your Q and R are multi-target AoE effects, which can proc this Font of Life on the entire enemy team if you get a great ult through them, and if you have built some of the items that we're going to talk about in the build section that activates certain effects every time you heal or shield an ally, well, this healing from Font of Life will activate those items. So say Ardent Sensor will proc every time somebody uses an auto attack on an enemy that you have procced Font of Life on. This just really helps you excel in teamfights, which is already a pretty strong area of the game for Nami, so it's just a great choice. Now, like I said, this Resolve tree is my go-to for secondary runes on Nami, but there is a second option that you should be considering. This second option is best when you're not going into hard engage, so you don't want that Bone Plating, but you are going into a very scary bot lane. Let's say you have a weak scaling ADC that's not going to be very good in lane, and the enemy is quite the opposite. In this situation, you can look towards the Inspiration tree, which can give you access to Biscuit Delivery, which is just a really great rune in lane for both mana sustain and health sustain, and then also either Time Warp Tonic or Magical Footwear. Both of these runes are really nice to have. Time Warp Tonic is usually seen in the higher elos or pro play. It's kind of a clutch rune. It requires you to be using your potions at the exact right time to really make the most of it. Magical Footwear, on the other hand, is a very easy rune to use because, well, you don't use it, you just wait. It saves you 300 gold, and it makes your boots better because they get a permanent 10 movement speed increase. Generally, when I'm looking towards the Inspiration tree, I'm looking towards Magical Footwear and Biscuit Delivery. By removing that need to buy tier 1 boots early on, and also helping you out with mana sustain and health sustain, this rune choice can help you survive in those particularly scary bot lane challenges, allowing you to get to the late game where hopefully you'll be excelling, making it a very good choice. Now let's talk about Nami's builds. To start off, our support item will always be Spell Thief's Edge. As we've talked about, Nami has very good poke potential, meaning she can stack the Spell Thief's Edge very easily. It also offers mana regen, which is very useful, so really it's the only choice for support item. Next, our boot choices on Nami are pretty flexible. Definitely don't be afraid to look towards the defensive option if you're going into full AD or full AP team comps, and this can also include just going into full AD bot lanes where, say, they have an ADC and a Senna or a Pike. That extra armor can be really helpful and really help you survive and do your job better. Assuming this isn't the case though, and you're not looking towards one of these defensive items, our core boot choice on Nami is going to be Ionian Boots of Lucidity. Also known as cooldown boots, these are pretty great. They recently received both a buff and a nerf because they now give you more ability haste, but they also cost 50 more gold. They're still pretty cheap though at 950, which is cheaper than most boots, and they're an overall great pick on Nami. So now we've got our boots and we've got our support item, we're going to look, of course, to our mythic item. The core mythic item that I would always suggest that you think towards is Imperial Mandate. It's just a really great item. It offers a lot of awesome base stats that Nami loves. It also has a relatively good build path, and it has a specific synergy with Nami's E, which makes it very easy to use. Empowering an ally with your E will mean that their next ability or auto attack will slow the enemy, especially when you're using this alongside an ADC. You can empower them with your E, and then they can apply very easily with an auto attack a slow to the enemy champion. This then procs Imperial Mandate, doing extra damage and marking them. And of course, if your ally champion manages to get a second hit off, it will also proc it again, dealing even more damage. This means that Imperial Mandate is quite easy to use on Nami, and it's easy to get the absolute most out of this item. For that reason, if I'm ever thinking about whether I should go Imperial Mandate or our next item, Moonstone Renewer, I'll usually go Mandate. I do think, however, that Moonstone Renewer still has a place with Nami, it's just more limited. If you have a strong teamfight orientated team comp, or if you have an APC, so you don't have an auto attack based ADC on your bot lane, then Moonstone Renewer can really shine. Although Nami's E does proc on abilities, you won't get the most out of Imperial Mandate when you're playing alongside an APC instead of an ADC. And Moonstone Renewer is just a fantastic all-around teamfight option. I'm sure you guys have seen Moonstone Renewer being played on all sorts of crazy champions that it was never intended for, like Lilia, just because it really does bring a lot to the table in teamfights, especially if you have the ability to stay in combat. For this reason, I would always suggest that you keep Moonstone Renewer on the table and you consider it, but you look towards Imperial Mandate most of the time. Now that we've built our mythic item, we're going to look towards Staff of Flowing Water. For me, this is the core legendary item on Nami. It's offering you ability power, bonus heal and shield power, base mana regen, but of course the bread and butter of this item is the passive, which offers any ally that you heal or shield bonus ability power and ability haste. This bonus is also applied to you whenever you proc it on an ally, so it's really awesome. This is almost always the first item after my mythic item that I look towards, but there are a couple of exceptions. Firstly, if you just really don't have anybody on your team that's going to make any use of this passive, then of course you can forgo this item. And secondly, if I have a hyper carry ADC, this is someone like a Kai'Sa, a Vayne, a Twitch, or a Kog'Maw, people that love attack speed and they love to just 1v9 and get out of control by the late game. In both of these scenarios, I'm instead going to look towards Ardent Censer. Ardent Censer is of course a very similar item to Staff of Flowing Water, but it works with auto attacks and attack speed instead. Obviously, because this buff is also applied to you, it's not as good as Staff of Flowing Water just for yourself because you don't really need that on-hit damage or that attack speed, but it is extremely good for your ADC. And then finally, this is where build choice will start to diverge based on the game and your performance and your team. But the options for our final items will consist of Chemtech Putrefier. This is the anti-heals option. Every time you heal or shield an ally, they will get buffed 60% grievous wounds on their next attack against an enemy champion. And also you will apply 40% grievous wounds whenever you deal magic damage. This is a must-have if you have a stubborn allied team that won't build anti-heals and the enemy's healing is getting out of control. However, if your teammates have picked up a lot of anti-healing items, or if the enemy just simply doesn't have the healing or the sustain necessary to make this item worthwhile, we're going to look towards Redemption. Redemption is yet another great team fighting item. It has solid base stats, but it's active, which summons a large zone to heal or damage allies or enemies in a massive circle. Makes it exceptional in team fights, which of course makes it a great item to pick up later on Nami. And then the final item that you should always be considering is the Stirring Wardstone. This offers an absurd amount of ability haste, the most in one item in fact, once it's fully upgraded. And of course it gives you a huge vision advantage. That being said, this vision control is not as useful in lower elos. Firstly, both you and your team are not going to be able to make the most out of this extra vision, but also the enemy isn't going to be warding as much, so having extra control wards isn't going to be as useful. That being said, I still like to at least consider it, and if you're in Plat Plus, you definitely have to be considering this, because that's when vision disparities can really make or break some games. And finally, we're going to talk about a few little tips and tricks, as well as a couple of combos that are really going to help you master Nami. So the first thing I want to talk about, and this is something that I suggest to everybody that's picking up enchanters, to be honest, bind the abilities that can be self-cast to mouse buttons. I know not everybody does have a mouse that has mouse buttons, but if you do, you really should consider this. On Nami, it's especially important to at least self-cast bind your W. The reason for this is that in certain situations, you must be using your W on an ally to start the trade in order to get the maximum amount of bounces off given the amount of enemies and allies that are around you. There are many different situations where this can be applicable, but the most obvious one is that if you are entering a trade in lane and you are already damaged, and there is only one enemy that is going to be within bouncing distance, you should start on yourself by self-casting W, healing yourself before the trade, then it will go on to the enemy that you're trading with, and then hopefully bounce back to your ADC as well. Likewise, self-cast E can also be really useful, and we're going to talk about one of those situations next. So in my opinion, the absolute best reason to self-cast E is to set up your other abilities. Remember, the damage that your E does scales off your ability power, and it's the same for whoever you apply it to. So if you apply E to yourself, and you hit the enemy with free attacks or abilities, then it's the same amount of overall damage. This is opposed to, say, self-cast W and E on a Lulu, which you really should be saving for your ADC. So by self-casting it, you won't lose any damage, and you can also choose who to slow down and help set up your Q. Nami's Q can be extremely difficult to get used to. It's one of the hardest abilities to hit in my opinion, at least on an enchanter support. So by Eing yourself, auto-attacking them, slowing them down, you can set up for your Q very easily early on and get a fantastic trade-off. To combine this with our first point, it just makes it so much more simple if you have self-cast E bound to a mouse button, and I think this will really help you out. On this idea of setting up your Q, once you hit level 6, I would suggest not engaging with your Q if you have your ult up. Unless the enemy is already CC'd and you are extremely confident that you will hit, your ult is so easy to hit and can do so much for you on an engage that it is much safer in my opinion to just set up with your ult and then throw your Q in once they're knocked up to chain CC. Also, when you are engaging, you should consider that Nami's passive, which speeds up allies whenever you use an ability on them, is actually not limited to targetable abilities like your W or your E. And so if you're in the backlines playing a safe kind of enchanter playstyle, as is probably quite common for you, and you use your ult and go through your allied champions before going to the enemy, they will all receive a speed buff. This is another great reason to engage with your ult, because you can speed up your allies, do a massive amount of AoE CC, and then come in safely from the backlines to follow up with your Q. The next thing I want to talk about is the use of your E when you have Aerie as a keystone. Because Aerie will apply when you use your E, it means that Aerie will proc your Ardent Censer or your Staff of Flowing Water buffs. This is something that you should definitely consider at all times, because by using your E on somebody first and then using your W, you can ensure that the Aerie is used defensively to apply that Ardent Censer or that Staff of Flowing Water, and then your W can be used just as a simple heal to apply it as well. In this way, you can help spread those buffs throughout your team, and you'll find this is more useful when you have the upper hand or you're in a safe team fight, so you have the flexibility to really think about where you're placing your abilities. Likewise, you can use your E to apply that Aerie shield in clutch situations. Obviously, in Season 11, there's quite a bit more damage over time than there used to be, so if you have an ADC that's running back, maybe he's burning from a brand on the bot lane, if you have Aerie and you have your E, you can use your E on your ADC, apply that small Aerie shield, and a few times this really has saved their life. And finally, I just want to clarify something that we did talk about earlier. If you have chosen to use the Font of Life rune, your E will only apply Font of Life if you self-cast it and you're using your own attacks to proc the slow. This means that if you E an ally and they slow somebody down, while it will apply the Imperial Mandate, it will not apply the Font of Life. This is really a minor thing, especially if you've chosen to go for Imperial Mandate, but it's just something to keep in mind, and it's especially useful early on. Like we've discussed, you don't lose any damage by self-applying it, so really it's kind of free unless you're using it to proc that Aerie shield. And we're done. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope this has helped you out. If you've got any questions whatsoever, do leave a comment. I'll try and get back to you. And as usual, if you do want to have a say in upcoming guides, hit that subscribe button and head over to the community tab on the channel page where we run all of our polls for upcoming content.